We love Zencaster because it allows us to record the audio for our podcast and create the video segments we use for our weekly Sister Scoop episodes. Zencaster has helped us make content capture simple.
It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests, and feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable.
If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code SistersAssembled, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Katie and I are always hungry, and one snack we both love is beef jerky. That's why we're so excited to tell you about one of our favorite jerky brands, Matt Hat Jerky.
Matt Hat's delicious taste makes it a great snack, and the variety of flavors, including original, black truffle, and my personal favorite, roasted garlic, means there's a flavor for everyone. Plus, it's local to the area where we grew up in, which we just love.
Use the link in the show notes below to get some Matt Hat Jerky for yourself, and make sure to use our coupon code SistersAssembled for 10% off. Hello, listeners, and welcome to Sisters Assembled. As you know, we have been continuing our Deadpool and Wolverine coverage with some deep dives on topics that we could not fit into our initial reactions episode. So, this episode is going to be dedicated to my least favorite topic on the planet, the multiverse. And we're going to try to bring some intelligent takes and some theories and some thoughts and connections to what we learned about the multiverse in this film. And we're going to do our best because it simultaneously made things better and worse, as most of the entries related directly to the multiverse in this saga have done. So the good, the bad, the ugly, we're going to cover it all. Without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Katie, and she's going to start the episode.
Let's start with the good. And the good to me is anything that I now understand. The first being, Deadpool and Wolverine has confirmed that it takes place post Loki Season 2. How do we know? Well, the first being that Paradox says it, and his whole little, time-eating machine shouldn't exist, or at least should not be active. I guess that's the better word. It exists, but it shouldn't be active. He's doing his own little thing in his little department, and they even say at some point, oh, does the upstairs know you're doing this? He also makes an offhand comment about, he doesn't really love the new direction the TVA has gone. And then, I think the most obvious jarring thing, if you didn't get that from the beginning, was B-15 is in charge and shows up at the end to punish Paradox, but also to handle the situation. So, she's in charge because Loki saved the multiverse. Also, we have the multiverse, which is referenced. So I feel like it's obvious, but still, regardless, that made me feel happy.
Yes, I have a few things to say in response to that. First is that it is exciting to have something directly reference Loki. This is the first time Loki has been referenced outside of Loki, period, the end. We've seen maybe sort of kind of some ramifications from season 1, but it's a hint at best and only subtly there if you're really looking for it and also kind of making a leap of logic.
Well, unless you count Kang.
Yes, true. However, we don't know that necessarily the death. Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Because the death of He Who Remains brings Kang the Conqueror.
And is the reason why, the Council of Kangs was able to be possible.
True. But that's still, less... we had the actual TVA in a movie.
True. Oh, yeah, for sure. That's unheard of.
Yeah. So I'll take that back a little bit and say this is the first time we've had such a direct reference. We have had some of the ramifications of Loki play out in things like Ant-Man, Quantumania, but this is the first time we're directly referencing. It's the first time characters from that show are showing up in other properties, which is super exciting. The other thing I want to point out from what you were saying is this is now the second time that we've seen factions within the TVA. a lot of season 2 was that woman whose name is escaping
Docs.
me. Yes, she was clearly running her own special little side operation.
Well, I remember hating her, and then she held her ground at the end, and
Yes.
then she got killed. But I respected her for being like, hey, Renslayer, you're psychotic.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting that we have now seen twice some, division within the TVA. It shows that things are not all hunky dory over there. I definitely think that this film shows, not just for that reason, but multiple reasons, the TVA is here to stay. As much as I may not enjoy that because they hurt my head. But I think it's important to, tie it more explicitly to some of the outer properties and the multiverse at large instead of it living within its Loki bubble because it is such a main player in the multiverse. It is clearly affecting so much. I mean, that show birthed the multiverse, right? In a way that nothing else has. It is the property that has most consistently dealt with the multiverse and its ramifications. So it was weird for it to live inside its own bubble and then be like, boop, the multiverse exists everywhere else, but never reference it directly. So I'm hoping this is just the start of, hey, this is the TVA. Hey, this is, even if people aren't recognizing what Loki is doing as the god of stories, which I think is a very deep cut and really should be saved for a Thor 5 because that is a familial connection and they deserve to be back together. But even if we don't go as far as talking about Loki directly, the TVA as an organization is still overseeing the multiverse in a much different way than they were, obviously, in season 1 of Loki. But they're overseeing it, making sure it's healthy and happy. And guess what's not a healthy and happy multiverse? One where there are incursions. So I don't think we've seen the last of the TVA.
I know you explicitly just said about leaving Loki alone. I want to talk about Loki actually before we continue the TVA conversation because something that bothered me. And now let me preface this by saying one of my biggest complaints, my biggest being we have no idea where Loki season 1 or 2 fully fell on a timeline. And while we still don't exactly for sure, we do now have a property that's like, hey, I'm afterwards, which is kind of what I was saying. Like, that's such a good thing to know to be like, no, we can explicitly sit here and say, we know this is after. My other complaint is I don't understand Loki's job title, if you will, and what he does as the god of the multiverse or the god of stories. We all kind of use those interchangeably, but I guess officially it's the god of stories. Because I don't understand his job title, my entire thought process when Cassandra came out of the void and was like, let me destroy everything, was why would the man who's holding the entire multiverse not be involved here?
I have so many thoughts. The first being, do I sound weary yet? We're only like 5 minutes in.
I know.
I think my first thought is I too don't actually know what the God of Stories job title includes. Like, what are your roles and responsibilities, Loki? You brought together the tethers, right? The strands.
He is literally breathing life into the multiverse, which I understand. So then I'm like, is that it? Like, is that all he's doing? And then everything just plays out as so? Like, is that all he does?
I guess I also just still don't understand that whole loom. Like, I never really understood the loom, and now he's like a human loom, right? Like,
I've
that's kind of
literally
what he
blocked
is
some of this
now.
out.
No, I definitely did too because suddenly I started having flashbacks and it got really dark
No,
really
same.
quickly.
I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, don't bring that up again.
Yeah. So, in the effort to spare us from having to go back to that dark place where we're trying to understand the loom, I will say my understanding is that he is now a human loom. He's making sure they're all connected and healthy and happy and doing their thing, question mark. And then to your point about shouldn't he have been involved if Cassandra was trying to literally take down the multiverse? I guess I have a couple of thoughts to that one as well. It's kind of like twofold, right? It's like, how much does he actually know what's going on, right? Like,
Right.
how much is he fully aware of what's happening on such a granular and small level? Like, if he's looking at and protecting and whatever, overseeing a million universes, is there really any way for him to know, unless it already happens, that something crazy is happening on just one of them? And the other thing is, what would happen if he does leave? Like, if he comes to stop Cassandra, who's holding the multiverse together? Because he's kind of that guy who has the power, who was born to do it, right? So it is really complicated, and I don't know what his purview is. Like, is he like the watcher and can see, or is he more like, I just see these strands and I'm holding them together because I am the god of the multiverse? I don't know.
That's kind of what I mean. I'm not really sure what he does beyond the basic of what I've been shown. Regardless of that being said, I just kept thinking about that when I saw her because, too, I'm thinking, and I know this is not the point here, but I'm also like, who put her there? Like, who made the executive decision to be like, Cassandra has to be in the void, but let's not tell the person who's going to hold the entire multiverse together that this threat could just leave.
Well, okay, a few things. One, I think it is something I just thought of. I almost wonder if there's like a hierarchy of, like, you know how like you escalate a problem?
Yeah,
So like it's Paradox's problem until it becomes B15's problem until it becomes Loki's problem. So I wonder if because it like never got to the point where she was like truly like she was destroying that universe for sure. We saw the spaghettification happening. I don't know if it was beginning to expand beyond that universe yet. Like, I guess my question around the time ripper is like, okay, does it go one universe at a time? Or does it start maybe at its home universe and then go simultaneously through multiple universes? So, like, is it a tiny little ripple? So, at the time when she was just destroying that universe, which I guess is 10005, right? Deadpool's home universe. I don't know that it had reached the level where it needed to be escalated to Loki because B15 handled it, right? So I think that's something to think about too, is like it hadn't quite gotten to the point where the god needed to be taken off his throne, or not taken off, but like needed to come off his throne to handle the situation. In terms of why wasn't he told about Cassandra, I actually think that it's not something that anyone would have thought to tell him. Here's why. I am willing to bet that the person who chose to remove Cassandra as an infant from wherever she was and put her in the void, I'm willing to bet that was Paradox. Because she and Paradox seem to have like a little agreement, right? You don't bother me. You let me rule over the void. I have my symbiotic relationship with Eliath, and you just keep sending me people for me to sacrifice to Eliath. Great. I won't leave the void. I'm happy here. I'm a queen of my own kingdom. Everybody's happy. It's an ecosystem, essentially, that they had built. So if it's not broke, why do we need to tell anybody or run that up the flagpole? It's perfectly working until something like a Deadpool who's desperate shakes up the status quo. I think that's kind of the mindset. Also, there's the question of how long has Paradox been going rogue? How long has he been skirting the rules of the TVA? He seemed to very much be in line with the old TVA ethos and the old TVA ways of working, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't bending the rules to further his own agenda, even within the old TVA. So I think there's a couple of layers to it.
I agree. I want to just, and we don't need to talk about this more than I just need to air the question of if she is such a queen, if you will, of the void, how come Loki and Sylvie just went in and went out? We don't need to talk about it, but you were kind of bringing that, as you were saying that, it made me think about the fact that I was like, hold on, the first time we were in the void, like Loki and Sylvie were in the void and we were seeing it from their perspective. And I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up. But I see your point as far as like a hierarchy and how that makes perfect sense. As far as Paradox, it seemed like there were a lot of rogue TVA agents even before. I mean, I'm even thinking in season 1, it felt like there were a lot that didn't necessarily do exactly what they should have been doing. And I think it became very obvious the second that season 2 came out and the TVA shifted what they were trying to do. Don't get me wrong, I totally understand there are people being very loyal to the fact that they were, dare I say, almost programmed to think, this is my job. I am supposed to be here and doing this, and this is what I've always been told. And those are the people who probably also were very much denying the fact that they had been variants, and instead of being pruned, they were put to work and they lost an entire life. Instead of feeling sympathetic or instead of wanting to go back to that, they instead were like, no, 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 but this was my purpose. So why would I change it now? I get those people, but I do think there were also plenty of people who just wanted to get their way, if you will. And I'm sure it made that in that power vacuum a little easier. For example, Paradox was down there on his own floor with a whole team that maybe they didn't necessarily agree with what he was doing or realize what he was doing, but they were taking his orders. Or on the flip side, they knew exactly what he was doing, agreed with him, and were fully on board with everything Paradox wanted to do.
Yeah, and I think the other option is, in that power vacuum you mentioned, people can consolidate their power and they can make those plays. I mean, Paradox was acting as a god over his, what do they call it, district. Like, he got to choose who lived and who died. And I think there's the element of denial that he's maybe a variant or alignment with the values of the old TVA. But then there's also the idea of you lose a lot of power as a TVA agent going from the old TVA to the new TVA, right? You had the power to decide essentially what universes lived or died under the old TVA model. Now, under the new TVA model, which is significantly more benevolent, everybody gets to live and you just watch them live their lives and make sure that nothing is going drastically wrong that could kill an entire universe or, God forbid, the multiverse, right? There's a lot less choice over others and a lot less power involved. And I think for someone like Paradox, that's the other element is he lost that power, or he would have if he had chosen to run his district in alignment with the way that the TVA was now running. Because he definitely seems like that kind of guy who he enjoyed being able to make the life and death decisions about other people.
Look how he was already trying to do it.
Exactly.
I mean, his entire storyline was based off the fact that he's like, yeah, your universe would die in like a billion years, but I'm just going to completely destroy it now because I don't have the patience for it. And the thing about people in the TVA is they literally would wait until it would have to reach that point. Like they are outside of time, right? Like some of them could probably be thousands of years old. Like we don't know. And so you do see that there is that power one. And also it is like he enjoys being able to end it because he could sit there and press the button and say, this will be the end of it. So I agree. I will say he was an interesting person to kind of introduce us to some new concepts, which I think this is where we get into the part where we're going to hate this. And that's kind of bringing in the multiversal aspect. So, for one, as I already said, we do know that this is post Loki season 2. We obviously saw the multiverse was wide open. We know that there were other universes, and we know his universe was dying. We saw the TVA talking to him about it. But then, in all of this, we were introduced to anchor beings, which I think is very interesting. I think I've seen a lot of people kind of comparing them to Nexus beings, which they're not the same.
Aren't they? Because the king himself, Kevin Feige, has said in an interview, oh, well, you could say Nexus, Anchor, and get this, Omega level mutants might just be different ways of describing the same thing.
Okay, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Let me say why. The first being, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the first is we were told a Nexus being is a being that exists in one entity only. An example, the Scarlet Witch, not Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, the entity of Scarlet Witch. America Chavez, she is considered a Nexus being. There's only one of her in the entire multiverse. That is my understanding of a Nexus being. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Okay, so I went into a rabbit hole in prepping for this episode because I knew we were going to get into Anchor being versus Nexus being. It's the same kind of thing when we were talking about dimensions versus universes, which, by the way, still not clear on that. It's been 3 years. But anyway, maybe 2, whatever. Anyway, long story short, what I was reading is there's also the way that Nexus beings are described in the comics, which is that they are people that can do things within their universes that actually end up altering the future. So in the comics, Nexus beings are people like the Scarlet Witch. Kang is actually, Nathaniel Richards is actually considered a Nexus being. So it's less about there being one of them and more just being this one central figure. And this is where it sounds like an anchor being in every universe that has this power over the universe, that their decisions alter the timeline itself. Now, doesn't that sound a little bit familiar?
Yes, and I'm not disagreeing. I guess I'm just going off of I appreciate the comics, obviously. But from what I feel like they've painted a Nexus being as in the MCU, it's not necessarily that.
I don't disagree because my understanding has been, up until this point, the same as yours.
Yeah, because like again, and I'm going to use America as a great example here. First off, where is she even from? We literally have one flashback of her accidentally sucking her mom's into a multiversal portal, and that is it. We never know where she's actually from, and there's only one of her. So like, while I hear everything you're saying, she is like already an outlier to that entire idea.
Well, I'm gonna come back to that, or come back to you with, it is possible that there are other America Chavezes who have, one, maybe not the same power, or two, did not have that event happen.
Yeah, but didn't she confirm when she went to all the universes she's gone to, she has never found another her at all?
She might have.
And that's why everybody was like, "Oh, she's a Nexus being. Like is the only one that exists in the entire multiverse."
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna just bring it back to, everybody has a different, like, every property has come at the multiverse differently. And this is where I get frustrated because Kevin's out here suggesting Nexus equals anger equals Omega level mutant.
Well,
What?
hold on. I didn't even want to get there yet. Hold on. Let's table that thought for a second. Because regardless, I still think that I see where the lines blur between a Nexus being and an anchor being. But also, from my understanding, again, off of what we've been taught so far about a Nexus being and an anchor being in now separate properties, an anchor being is also like they're holding their universe together, which in its of itself, I'm now intrigued by this concept because essentially every universe is now destined to always die at some point, which is interesting. But an anchor being is holding that universe together, essentially. And so, for example, when Deadpool's anchor being died, which was the Wolverine we saw in Logan, and he died, that was what was going to cause his universe to eventually deteriorate. Okay. But again, there's like 17 million versions of Logan, which was proven in this movie and all the Fox properties, but we don't need to go there. Although we're going to go there in a second, but we're not going there right now.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think it comes down to, like, the idea of, and I'm going to use your own example against you, there are multiple Wandas, but only one Scarlet Witch. It doesn't mean that Logan/Wolverine is special in every universe. Clearly, the one who is the main protagonist of Deadpool and Wolverine is not an anchor being, right? He is the lowest of the low in the terms of, ranking of the Wolverines. They made that super clear. I think the fact that the anchor being is theoretically someone different in every universe just has to do with, again, the variety of every universe. Every universe turns out differently. We have the point where you diverge theoretically off the sacred circle, because I guess we're still going off that concept. Nothing has refuted that in terms of this film that I could tell. So the point at which you diverge off the sacred circle, then basically every universe is different. We saw that even with America, right? She talks about how food is different. Green means stop and red means go in some universes. So because each universe is so diverse and so different, the anchor being is going to be different. So just because it's a Wolverine in one universe and the Scarlet Witch in another universe, for example, doesn't mean they're going to be anchor beings in every universe.
No, and that's fine. I guess my argument is essentially they don't make sense when you try to say they equal each other because there's already too many examples that go against that and that dispute it. Is kind of what I'm trying to say. Is like I see what you're saying and I think it makes perfect sense. I'm just saying if you're trying to say Nexus being equals an anchor being, like I already feel like with some of the characters you've introduced and how you've introduced them, it has already kind of made this point of that can't always be true. Like 1+1 cannot always equal 2 almost. But sometimes it does. What is that one? There's some stupid math thing that whenever you have to take it, oh, it was like the worst whenever we did it in class. But it was like the whole idea of like, sometimes it follows these rules, but sometimes it follows these rules. So in doing so, you could end up with different things.
PEMDAS?
No, because PEMDAS has rules and people just don't know how they work. That is how people always get incorrect answers.
No, literally, I totally agree. But when you were like, oh, different answers, like there's a right and a wrong here, people.
No, not PEMDAS. PEMDAS is actually very clear.
Is it like functions?
It might be. I can't remember. About? It's literally been like 5 years since I've taken a proper math class. And even then I took like stats. So not the same. But I do remember there being one where it's like suddenly the rules changed. And I just remember being like, oh my God, I couldn't understand math before. And now you're
I
telling
think
me
it is functions.
it might be. I blocked it out. But regardless, this is kind of what this seems like, where it's like, okay, we might say this theoretically, but not everything's always gonna make this make sense.
It's kind of like when you learn a language and you're like, there are rules for conjugating, and then like there's also 4,000 exceptions to the rules for conjugating.
Yeah, exactly. So that was mainly my argument, not necessarily like what it was and how it worked, but just proving that there are already outliers to this theoretical point. Now, getting into the idea of the Omega level threat, I'm angry about this statement and I wish it was never said because that doesn't make sense to me. Storm is an Omega level threat. We have that confirmed in X-Men 97. Okay, maybe they never said that in, Halle Berry's version of it. But I would have to think every version of Storm is an Omega level threat. Like, you don't just, have a weak one over there and, a really strong one over here. Like, no, I would think every version of Storm or Magneto or whatever are
Or
all...
Charles, Jean.
No, that's what I mean. Like, I would have to think they are all Omega level threats. And so to say that they are somehow also equal to Nexus beings, which are somehow supposed to be only one in existence, supposedly, plus anchor beings in every universe seems really a far stretch to me.
I also swear to you that Deadpool referred to Wolverine as an Omega level threat or an Omega level mutant. Like, the word Omega was definitely used in the movie, and I could have sworn it was in reference to Wolverine because I sat there and I was like, no offense to good old Wolvie, but his adamantium claws do not match up to, My Girl Storm. Not the same.
I feel like you can't be an Omega level threat when a real Omega threat can literally take the bones out of your body.
Or force you to do whatever you want, whatever he wants. Or electrocute you while also stabbing you with ice.
Or when Jean literally in The Last Stand was sitting there tearing him apart and he was trying to regenerate and she was tearing him apart.
Yeah. And like I said, that I don't remember if it was in reference exactly to Wolverine. I thought it was though, because I remember my eyebrows went up.
Well, I'm gonna be rewatching the movie and I'll keep an eye out for that specifically.
Yeah, please report back because wherever they mentioned the Omega level mutant in the film, immediately my ring inside my head, I was like, oh my gosh, word, that's important.
Are you sure it wasn't in reference to Magneto or something? Because I know they mentioned Magneto had been in the void and had died at the hands of Cassandra.
I don't know. I could have sworn it was Wolverine because I remember thinking to myself, that doesn't make sense.
Unless it was just he was in the conversation. That's why I'm wondering if that was kind of what you're thinking.
Yeah, maybe. Definitely rewatch it and report back and listen for that because I just remember being like, what? I don't know. And maybe I'm making it up. I don't know, but I really thought it was in there.
Well, regardless, Omega level threats equaling Nexus being equaling anchor beings doesn't make sense.
It does not.
That does not make sense. But worst off, don't be throwing new terms at me if they all mean the same thing.
Yeah. And I think it might just be Kevin's way of cleaning up our vocabulary because again,
then do this proactively. Do it proactively.
Look, I don't disagree.
Know what you want to call things before you just let writers and directors make up new terms and new names, give them to us, and then now we're like, oh, I guess anchor beings are a thing, which is fine. They can exist, and Nexus beings can exist, and they can be separate. They can be completely separate. They never said Nexus beings had to exist in every universe. They never said anything of that nature. We just know there are a few already walking among us. I'm fine if they were separate, but don't try and be actually they're just synonyms. No.
Look, I don't disagree. I think it's confusing and it adds an extra layer of complication. I actually liked the concept of an anchor being because it was simple.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Person who's important dies. Okay, universe slowly decays because their linchpin of a person is no longer there making it happen.
And it answers our question because I think, and obviously I understand the multiverse is supposed to be infinite. That's a fact that I think we all can agree on. But I think we always were saying theoretically a branch can branch and branch and branch and branch and just keep branching. And it's like, how long does this go? Like, how? And we kept saying, we don't really understand how the multiverse looks now. But if it's a tree, wouldn't they be running into each other? Also known as incursions. So I do think this would also kind of help the idea of at least we know universes do die naturally.
Yes. You brought up the tree. We need to talk about the pictures. I don't want to talk about the pictures because we've talked about them ad nauseum and they don't make sense because none of them are consistent. But we gotta talk about it because we all remember very clearly the line that was the sacred, what we're now calling the sacred circle because of Quantumania, which I stand by that, even though Quantumania is kind of a mess. I stand by our sacred circle. However, in Loki season 1, it is depicted as a line, like a classic timeline. Then we see all of the craziness that happens at the end of the season. By the end of season 2, we are now referring to it as a tree, right? That's what we're shown with Loki. That's then where we're also shown in What If, like about 8 weeks later. However, I'm pretty sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure behind Paradox, when he is first talking to Wade in that room with all the monitors, it's the same scene where he shows him the clips of like from our past movies. It's also the one where he sees himself being held by Thor. Isn't that monitor showing what would be a sacred circle with a bunch of squiggly lines that look like octopi?
Yes, because I was like, this looks weird.
Yeah, so where's the tree? And what does this have to do with the tree? And why are they moving? And are these just dying universes? I have so many questions, and just give me one visual that I can hold on to and say, this is the multiverse. Please.
So here were my thoughts, and first correct me if I'm going to be wrong when I say this. Does the TVA know that the multiverse now looks like a tree? Or do we just know as the audience?
Well, I think you can see. Okay, remember how when they were in that area where they could see the loom breaking?
Yeah.
That's where Loki is now with his tree.
Right. But are they like too close to realize that it's like now a tree?
Well, you can see it's not a timeline.
I guess. I mean, my other thought is just Paradox was zoomed in on Deadpool's like universe.
But then what were the other like lines? Like why were there moving lines? Like and not like oh the line is growing. Like I literally mean like octopus tentacles. Why were they moving? What does that mean?
Listen, I can't answer everything, but I do think that it was probably zoomed up into Deadpool's. I don't know what Paradox's day-to-day job is in the TVA, but we know for the time being, he was very determined to take down this already now dying universe. And by already dying, like, again, billions of years from now. So maybe that's just, it was zoomed in on Deadpool's universe. I don't know what the squiggly lines mean. I really don't. I don't know if there are other universes that are maybe starting to already deteriorate that are nearby. I don't know.
I hate the multiverse. We've reached that point in the episode, folks. It only took us 30-something minutes, but I hate the multiverse.
I mean, my only other thing would be, I'm going to ask a question you're going to hate.
Oh, no.
Anchor beings, right? When he was showing the little chart, he shows like, okay, this would be like the end of the anchor being's life. And then you see the line kind of start to fade. And then when Cassandra starts to kill the universe, I think you start to see like the line move closer to the end point, right? Theoretically, it can still be branching. The timeline could still branch post the anchor being dying. Theoretically, because we have not been told otherwise. So could the squiggly lines be related to the fact that they're branches that are just maybe weaker than the rest because the anchor being that they're from the universe they're branching off from is already dead?
I would actually argue that the anchor being dying should create a branch, right? Like now that universe has to, because if you're saying each one becomes its own sacred timeline, right? That's the theory that as it branches off, it is now its own, that's supposed to happen world, right? Everything that deviates from what's supposed to happen, which how that's decided, I still don't know. But everything that deviates from that new timeline is a branch. If the anchor being is holding the timeline together, theoretically, that anchor being dying, especially if it's like someone like Logan is a good example because he's technically kind of immortal, right? Because of his healing factor. And I get that he had reached an age where the adamantium was probably poisoning him and like That's why he was able to die in Logan, right?
Although, let's just say, like, I feel like Logan never actually clarified why he was fully dying.
No, that was my interpretation.
That was also my interpretation, but I was like, I'm glad we just didn't actually address. Like, I'm glad they were not sure how to cause an almost immortal person to die. So they just were like, here's a hint he might be getting poisoned. Like, what?
Literally, I was like, I'm glad we're never gonna like fully address this.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's just say that because he and like I said, he's a good example because he's essentially immortal, but the adamantium poisons him. Maybe Wolverine doesn't get the adamantium in every universe, right? Who knows? But in this universe, he has it and it's killing him slowly. And then he dies. But this universe he was not supposed to die at that time, right? He was not supposed to die for a long, long time. Hence, quasi immortal. Him dying would create a branch because now you have this universe existing without him. That means the original would continue on, then all of them would die. In my humble opinion, every branch that this universe created, every branch off the branch, would all die. It's like when you snap a really big branch off a tree, all of the little branches that have grown off of it also die. So it shouldn't just be 10005 dying. It should be every branch universe off of 10005.
You're saying things I agree with, and you're saying things I don't agree with. The first thing that I just need to point out to you is you're saying, how do these times, or how do we know what like is the wrong point at this point? Don't forget what we were taught all the way back by He Who Remains. Time is circular, and he was picking the time. But let's be real. He said he saw the end of it. So if the sacred timeline technically, quote unquote, finished, it's just starting over again. Now, the branches, now they're allowed to happen, are what allows the multiverse to be a thing and to allow new things to happen. But because there wasn't the ability, they were snipping everything before, time was just going again and again and again, which is why Endgame was possible.
You lost me. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay, Sacred Circle, our bestie, in the middle.
Yeah.
It's a circle for a reason because time keeps going.
Right.
The multiverse had to branch from it.
Uh-huh.
So that's how you get your diverging points.
Right.
You were saying like the time, you were like, who's picking? No, I think Kang finished the circle, or He Who Remains.
Sorry, to clarify, my question is on those new universes, how are we deciding what's branching off from there? How are we deciding in, universe 2, right? If the Sacred Circle we're calling universe 1 just for argument's sake, how do we decide in its first branch, which would be universe 2, how do we decide in universe 2 what points do and don't belong? That was my question. I understand the concept from the Sacred Circle point of view because everything's supposed to happen.
So my theory with that would be that there are still going to be things that always have to happen. Canon events.
Oh yeah, what do they call those in Doctor Strange? When the Doctor lost his heart, not his hands. Why do I know that?
I don't know.
That
Every
is the
time
only
you
title I
you
have
bring it
memorized.
right out of the depths. I don't remember, but as the Sonyverse, aka then the Spider-Verse, had introduced it, they called it canon events. And that has to happen every time to either a person or in the universe itself. So that is probably what keeps those universes going. They can have branches, but at the end of the day, certain events still have to happen in order for the universe to continue.
Absolute point. So what you're saying is branches come off branches when we stray from absolute points. So for example, every time Doctor Strange gets in the car with Christine and Christine lives, branch. For example, if we're using that episode of What If as an example.
Right, but then she still has to die, which is what happens eventually. That was the whole point. Like, Christine always dies.
Yeah, so what is created is that new universe starts because she doesn't die in that exact moment, but she will die 3 days down the line, 3 months, 3 years, whatever.
And some universes can just end up more messed up than others because maybe they just have a crap ton of points, absolute points that are being missed. So they just keep getting all thrown off, creating new universes until like your top highest branch is some whacked out version of where we started. It's like Whisper Down the Alley.
Yeah.
So that's that part of that. In summary, then the other thing you were kind of saying was based off of the idea of like the branches and where the person dies, where the anchor being dies. I'm going to take the example of Logan as well. How do we know he wasn't supposed to die there? Your theory is based solely on the fact that somebody who's supposed to, again, in quotes, be immortal just about, shouldn't die. So he shouldn't have necessarily died in that moment. But what if he was? What if that was always supposed to be the sacrifice play? What if that was always supposed to be his ending? That is what had been written in time. And therefore, then your whole theory about everything else falls apart.
I don't know, man. I'm just spitballing. What do you want from me?
I do think, though, I really do. I think those squiggly lines, if we're really going to base off of those, are probably the branches. But this is what I mean. You made sense, then didn't make sense, then made sense, then didn't make sense. Like you argued for my side, then argued for yours without realizing it. Because when you said about like, oh, when you snap one big branch, like all the smaller ones will eventually die too. I do think you're right in that. I think those squiggly lines were probably the branches that were coming off of 10005. And so when Logan died, or let's say, I almost want to just say like the universe is like poisoned almost because it doesn't die initially, but it's going to die. All those other universes connected to it are now weak.
Yeah. All right, 2 more quick topics. We're going to try to keep them quick, even though I feel like they could literally be their own episodes. So we're going to do our best. The timeline doesn't make sense of this film against Logan. I forgot, but was pointed out when I was researching this episode, Logan takes place in 2026. So you have to assume that Deadpool does not take place in 2024. Deadpool and Wolverine. Which again, we are just going to circle back to Marvel. Put a timestamp on something, please.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing this movie proved to me, Logan should have been dead. Like that's all that really opening scene needed to prove. So I think, we do see Deadpool go back, or I guess it's like a flashback. He doesn't go back to 2018 prior to the snap and blip. I said something to T that made me want to not say anything ever again, but I was like, do the Infinity Stones, I would assume the answer is no, but I'm going to just throw it out there. Do the Infinity Stones have the ability to go across universes? My answer is probably no, because of everything the TVA taught us about them being paperweights sometimes. But I was like, did Thanos' snap affect Deadpool's universe, which theoretically put him 5 years behind? Nobody talked about that.
I also think the other thing to think about is they were very clear. The snap destroyed, obliterated, dusted half the universe.
Right.
Specifically.
That's why I think the answer is no. But I kind of feel like I have to just, because of the timeline, kind of just throw it in there as a possibility. But regardless, we know some years passed. Him and Vanessa have broken up, and we know some years have passed since then. I guess we're possibly shooting. I mean, here's the other problem though. Logan was like decomposed.
Yeah.
Not like he casually died like yesterday. No, he was like.
Now, to be fair, he was not embalmed and he did not have a casket. So, decomposition probably a little faster than one would expect. I'm just going to put that out there.
But still, not just his skeleton being left.
There was some meat on the adamantium.
Well, but that doesn't happen in like 2 months.
No, I mean, it definitely was a significant amount of time. I never really thought about it. And then an article was like, yeah, well, technically now there are 2 alive Logans. I was like, what do you mean? Just I'm going to leave that there for everybody to keep you up at night, because it will keep me up at night just thinking about it. Now, the other thing that I want to bring up is, and I read this in an article as well, and it hurt my brain, is the incursion that we know is coming in Secret Wars and was low-key hinted to at the end of, not even low-key, high-key hinted to at the end of Multiverse of Madness. We know it's going to be 616, but the real question has been, who's the second universe, right? Is it 10005?
Why does it only have to be 1?
Well, okay, so having read the comic, here's the thing about Secret Wars, is like there are multiple universes that are colliding for sure, right? That's how you get Battle World. Each section of the world is a different universe. But the actual Secret Wars comic itself begins with the final incursion. Like the multiverse is literally at its final place of self-destruction. So it's 616 and what's called the Ultimate Universe in the comics, but we have to sub in another universe to be that final.
Well, I understand that. That's not something I don't understand. I'm just saying they take things here and there? Why does it only need to be one in the MCU? Because we know we have at least another one, which is the Marvels.
Well, is that though Deadpool's universe? Because we have Kelsey Grammer. That's the other thing I've been reading online.
Which is a fair point. But why is Maria Rambeau there? Also, don't forget Deadpool's universe is First Class.
Right. It's also tough because
because the Fox X-Men movies make literally no sense.
Yeah, like what the heck did Days of Future Past do? Like
Days of Future Past put a fork, and that is what theoretically made two different universes. But that being said, I would not say that the OG trilogy with Kelsey Grammer is Deadpool's. I would say the other one is.
Well, here's the thing. When I was, preparing for this episode, I was reading this article that made a really good point, and it was saying Deadpool treats the Fox X-Men universe not as two timelines that diverge at Days of Future Past. He treats them as one continuous timeline, which does not make sense.
Well, because I just thought of something that's going to hurt everybody's brain. The First Class group is meant to be in the 80s?
90s, 80s, and 90s. And they're in Deadpool. Yeah, I don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
I don't want to talk about
that's
it.
That's
what
I just realized. I was like, wait a second. No, mainly because I just finally watched all of them now that I didn't think about the fact that it's set clearly earlier.
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe that's just something we don't talk about and we just table that completely. As far as universes, I don't know. I'm sure we're going to hit a bunch of them. I'm sure this is how the X-Men come in because we have about 3 mutants right now in the entirety of the MCU. You've already somehow killed off Pietro. You theoretically killed off Wanda, which we know is not a true fact, and we know she'll be back, but still, which are 2 of your biggest mutants that haven't actually gotten to be properly on screen as mutants besides Evan Peters, Quicksilver, but then also didn't have his twin. And also, they never actually had him address Magneto as their father. So there was that. I don't know. I don't know whose universe is going to collide with anybody's. I'm just going to assume everybody's is going to collide.
Honestly, I need more information. So I'm going to go with that for now because it feels like a really good catch-all.
I honestly can't even try to wrap my brain around it. We have multiple universes and we have multiple ways of interpreting it by director, by writer, by movie, or by show and movie. It's to the point where you can only do so much.
Yeah. Honestly, it hurts my head. Truly gives me a tension headache trying to, it's like fitting a round peg in a square hole, or like Winnie the Bish doing a puzzle on the brown side only
because he's colorblind.
You just don't have all of the information. So how am I gonna put the puzzles? I get that you can try to fit the pieces, but it takes so much longer if you don't have the picture.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all you can do, and for right now, we don't have all the pieces. We're getting little tidbits here and there, and half the tidbits are contradicting each other, which is making it worse. Do I believe there's an end goal here? Yes. Is maybe the point of this to show that not everybody understands the multiverse at all and nobody really knows what they're talking about until we get to the final point, because the multiverse is a new entity for even those in, especially the MCU specific 616. Maybe then they're doing a darn good job at doing that because I'm lost.
You and me both, sister. All right, well, we've clearly reached the point of the episode where we have nothing logical left to say.
No, we could literally do a 5-hour episode on this and still not be able to reach real conclusions.
No, I think we've just thrown out random thoughts. So, I'm glad you guys stayed with us for this. We are just as confused as we were when we first started this episode, so appreciate your patience. But this is it. We're done now. And you should continue to follow the pod if you haven't already on your podcast platform of choice, because we're going to continue covering the multiverse every time we get a new hint, and also covering different aspects of Deadpool and Wolverine. You should also make sure you're checking out and bookmarking the website, which is, of course, the central hub to all things related to the show, and also the blog, which is a great supplemental resource to this show.
Give us a follow on all of our socials, which are linked below, or go ahead and just search Sisters Assembled, and we should come up. So follow us on all of those to keep up with us, the podcast, and just everything else going on. And we are still doing Deadpool and Wolverine coverage because there was just so much in this movie. So we are hitting up the mutants topic next week. This one's going to be interesting because we're mainly going to go off of what Kevin said beforehand. And he said, hey, this movie is ushering in the mutants and it's bringing it all together. And then we watched the movie and we were a little bit confused on where that goes. So we're going to be talking about the mutants, their future, what Deadpool and Wolverine did or didn't do for them all next week. Make sure you guys are joining us for that because it'll be a good one. Another good one. They've all been good ones, but it will be a good one. And in the meantime, keep up with Marvel, keep up with all new announcements and us, of course, as Marvel just blew your mind. So let's talk about it.